Welcome to Sola Church Online.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Alan Rigg. This is my wife, Miranda Landers, and we are super excited to launch our Santa Monica campus in January. We're just so glad that you've joined us online this morning.
And not only do we do church online, but we also offer virtual small groups. So even if you're in a different time zone, we have a group for you. And we'll tell you more about how you can get involved with that at the end of the service.
Yeah, and if you ever miss the premiere of a service, you can always go back and watch it later on our YouTube channel.
Last week, we had the biggest startup party yet.
That's awesome.
Lots of excitement about the launch in January, and people want to know how they can get involved.
Yeah, and the cool thing is that no matter where you live in the world, you can get involved in a number of ways. The most important thing that you can do is pray. No matter where you are, you can pray for the launch of Sola Church. You can pray that God would build our team and provide resources and give us favor with the city and help us find a venue and just all of those kinds of things. The second thing that people can do, and this again is true no matter where you are in the world, is you can give. We are raising funds to launch this church, and so we're counting on strong end of year giving to get us closer to our goal leading up to launch weekend. So there's that. Pray, you can give, and then this is more particular to people who are in or near Santa Monica and the west side of Los Angeles. The third thing is you can join. You can join our launch team. Launch team members are people who are attending startup parties. They're going to soon be attending launch team meetings. They want to have a role. They want to be hands-on. They want to be an usher or a greeter or play an instrument on the worship team, or they want to work with kids, or any one of a number of ways that they can serve. They want to have a role and be part of the team that makes this happen. So you can pray, you can give, you can join.
Let's worship.
Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name. Give and take away. Give and take away. Heart will choose to say, Lord, blessed be your name. You call me out upon the waters, the great unknown, where feet may fail. And there I find you in the mystery, in oceans deep, my faith will stand. And I will call upon your name and keep my eyes above the waves. When oceans rise, my soul will rest in your embrace. For I am yours, and you are mine. Grace abounds in deepest waters. Your sovereign hand will be my guide. Where feet may fail and fear surrounds me, you never failed, and you won't start now. So I will call upon your name and keep my eyes above the waves. When oceans rise, my soul will rest in your embrace. For I am yours, and you are mine. Spirit, lead me where my trust is without
This is that time in our service when we worship with our giving. If you're just checking us out today, please don't feel obligated to give. But if you have made Sola Church your church home, or even if you just want to help us launch a life-giving church in Santa Monica, there are several easy ways to make a tax-deductible donation.
The easiest way is to find the link in your chat feed, or you can go to solachurch.life and click Give.
Yeah, and you can also give by text or even using PayPal. The info should be there on the screen. So 5 Sundays in October, that happens once a quarter, that you get a 5th Sunday. And, here we are, last day of the weekend, a little less than 3 months out from our launch. So this today is an opportunity to close out the month of October really strong. We just thank you in advance for your support.
And our last startup party is Monday, November 15th at 7 p.m. at the Alt Studio in Santa Monica.
Yeah, so after that, we'll be transitioning to launch team meetings. So this is the last chance to attend one of these 60-minute events that are for both launch team members and new people wanting to learn more. If you come, you'll enjoy refreshments, you'll meet team members, you'll learn how you can get involved in the launch of Sola Church.
For more information or to RSVP, you go to solachurch.life and click the yellow button that says RSVP now.
Yeah, and just a reminder, if you can't come on November 15th, that's okay. There are options. You can schedule a coffee meetup with us. It's our treat. And we can have a conversation there. You can even schedule a video call if that works better for you.
Let's get into our time of teaching.
So we are in the next to last message in the Building Momentum message series. We've defined momentum as strength or force gained by motion or through the development of events. And each week I ask the question, in what area of your life do you need momentum? Surely by this point in the series, you've identified at least one area that you're focused on as we go through this content together. So last week we learned that every would-be momentum builder comes to the line. And the line that we were talking about, that's the line between that time where you're praying, you're planning, you're preparing to proceed, and everything is good. And then that time when you come to the line, and on this side is the comfort zone, on that side is the discomfort zone. On this side is a free ride, on that side is sacrifice. On this side of the line is safety, and on that side of the line is risk. And what do you do when you come to that line? We said that if a momentum builder crosses that line, they never look back. But if they don't cross it, they'll always wonder. So as we transition into this week's lesson, momentum builders, they have to be problem solvers because there are no opportunities without obstacles. Inertia builders, on the other hand, they turn back at the first sign of trouble. So there are many things that will work together to separate us from our vision and from one another. So our title this morning in part 5 is Indivision. That noun, indivision, refers to a state of being not divided or to oneness. And so what we want to do is we want to talk about several threats, several things that threaten to separate us from our vision or from one another. We're going to talk about criticism based on chapter 4 of Nehemiah. If you haven't turned there already, turn there now, Nehemiah chapter 4. So criticism in chapter 4, misalignment in chapter 5, and distraction in chapter 6. Now, obviously, we can't cover every verse in 3 chapters, but we're just going to highlight. We're going to pick some spots and draw some lessons. So let's talk first about criticism. Nehemiah 4, beginning in verse 1. I'm going to read the first 6 verses. It says, "But it so happened, when Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, that he was furious and very indignant and mocked the Jews. And he spoke before his brethren and the army of Samaria and said, 'What are these feeble Jews doing? Will they fortify themselves? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they complete it in a day? Will they revive the stones from the heaps of rubbish, stones that are burned?' Now Tobiah the Ammonite was beside him, and he said, 'Whatever they build, if even a fox goes up on it, he will break down their stone wall.'" And so now Nehemiah, Hear, O God, hear, O our God, for we are despised. Turn the reproach on their own heads and give them as plunder to a land of captivity. Do not cover their iniquity, and do not let their sin be blotted out from before you, for they have provoked you to anger before the builders. So we built the wall, and the entire wall was joined together up to half its height, for the people had a mind to work. Love it. Well, notice the verb mocked in verse 1. It means to mock, to deride, to ridicule. And this is what they did. And they did it by asking these rhetorical questions. 5 rhetorical questions in verse 2. Have you noticed that people sometimes ask rhetorical questions to be critical? You know, sometimes rhetorical questions have a use. Often when I'm teaching, I may ask a rhetorical question to help make a point, to help you think about what I'm saying and what I'm getting at. But sometimes people ask rhetorical questions to be critical. Like when they say, "You're not going to buy that, are you?" Or "You're not going to eat that, are you?" Or "You're not going to wear that, are you?" I mean, yeah, we're halfway from the door to the car. This is what I'm wearing. So yeah, that was the plan. So when they ask that they're being critical. Do you know anyone who's critical? Do you have a critic in your life? You know what we need to deal with the critics, with the criticism? We need a little STP. Now, as you may know, STP is a fuel additive that improves engine performance. But in dealing with criticism, I think we need a little spiritual STP. So the S in STP stands for source. When criticized, momentum builders consider the source. Is my critic my enemy, or are they a friend or family member? Do they know me worst and love me least, or do they know me best and love me most? In Nehemiah's case, the answer might surprise you because it's believed that Sanballat, mentioned in verse 1, was a practicing Jew. His daughter had married into the family of the high priest. We learned that in chapter 13, verse 28. So you never would have expected pushback from Sanballat. Instead, you would have expected buy-in. But notice the word furious and the phrase very indignant in verse 1. Strong emotions, right? And there's definitely a connection between vision and emotion. Just to illustrate that, when you envision eating your favorite food, you feel in advance some of the satisfaction that will be yours if you actually eat it. But on the other hand, if you got sick the last time you ate that food, you feel something else entirely when you think about it. You might feel a wave of nausea just remembering the way it tasted or the texture of it. So in the same way, when a person envisions something, they experience some of the emotion associated with that thing. And the more positive the emotion, the less likely they are to be critical. The less positive the emotion, the more likely they are to be critical. So extra biblical sources confirm that Sanballat was the governor of Samaria, just to the north of Judea, which is where Jerusalem was. So basically, I think what's going on here is this. I think that Sanballat was convinced that Judah's success would come at Samaria's expense, that Nehemiah's success would come at his, that is, Sanballat's expense. And sometimes we think that way too. But you know what? You can't believe in an all-powerful God and feel threatened by others. I'm going to say that again because I want it to sink in. You cannot believe in an all-powerful God and feel threatened by others. People who feel threatened by you building momentum will always be your biggest critic. So, if it's helpful for you to know who your biggest critic is going to be, here's how you can figure it out. Even on the front end, you can figure out who your biggest critic is likely to be. Just ask yourself this question: if my vision becomes a reality, who has the most to lose? That person is probably going to be your biggest critic. So the S in STP, source. The T in STP is takeaway. When criticized, momentum builders listen for takeaway. Now, admittedly, that's not always easy to do, especially when you're convinced that criticism is always throwaway. If you think that criticism is always throwaway, then you're not going to learn anything at all from criticism. But there's potential to learn. Which is harder? The knows you worst, loves you least critic, or the knows you best and loves you most critic? Well, they're both hard in their own way, right? But we need to listen, obviously. I mean, everybody would agree with this, that no doubt we need to listen to the knows you best, loves you most critic. Why? Because they know us best and love us most. But the point that I want to make is that we also need to listen to the knows you worst, loves you least critic. Why? Well, if you go back to verse 2, you'll notice that in effect, Sanballat was saying three things. He was saying that they were weak, that it would take a miracle. And at least from his point of view, that Nehemiah's team was overconfident and under-resourced. To which Nehemiah would have to answer, at least to being weak and to being, needing a miracle and being under-resourced. Nehemiah would have to answer 100. Like totally, that is totally 100% true. Now listen, when you were a kid, did anyone ever tell you that chewing gum takes 7 years to pass through the human digestive system? If that were true, I would have a gumball the size of a grapefruit inside my stomach right now. Just thought I'd throw that out there. But as it turns out, this isn't true at all. Gum is indigestible, but you know what happens to it? Think about it this way. Did you ever swallow a coin when you were a kid? I did once. I don't remember what coin it was. Hopefully it wasn't a quarter. But I did. I swallowed a coin. And you know what? I knew later on that it wasn't in my stomach anymore. If you swallowed a coin, did you know? Did you know hours later or days later that it wasn't in your stomach anymore? Of course you did. Now, I don't want to know how you knew. It's enough that you knew. But now that I've dispelled that myth, that though it's indigestible, it doesn't stay in our stomach, I think you'll understand the point. I mean, obviously gum has very limited nutritional value. And it's been said that criticism is like gum. Chew on it, but don't swallow it. It's good advice. Chew on criticism and it may help you. Swallow criticism and it may hurt you. If you internalize it, your critic gets inside your head. Pretty soon you're hearing their voice. Pretty soon it's your own inner critic, and that can tear you up. So, the T in STP, takeaway. But the P in STP is pray. When criticized, momentum builders pray. Nehemiah could talk to Sanballat. He could get in his face and confront him, but he didn't. Or Nehemiah could talk about Sanballat. And actually, that's not what he did either. He didn't just complain about Sanballat to other people. Not to say that it's always wrong to get somebody else's feedback on something. Sometimes you need somebody else's objectivity and you need to run something by them. But a lot of times, all we're doing is just making the problem worse by sharing too much with other people about someone else. What Nehemiah did, instead of talking to Sanballat at this point or even talking about Sanballat at this point, is that he prayed about Sanballat at this point. Now, I must admit, it wasn't your garden variety prayer. I mean, you heard it as I read it. Nehemiah expresses honest emotion. And his prayer has a lot in common with the so-called imprecatory Psalms. There's times in the Psalms where the psalmist is asking God to basically take their enemy and knock their teeth down their throat. But Nehemiah was keeping it real, and I'm convinced that's the way to pray. God knows how we feel, whether we tell him or not. So I just think it's best to be really honest with God. And even when our thoughts aren't the best thoughts, even when our feelings aren't the best feelings, it's just best to express it to God and let God help us sort it out. So in this particular case, things got worse before they got better. We find Nehemiah praying again in verse 9 and then rallying the troops in verse 14 by reminding them that God is great and awesome. So it's as if God is saying, we may be small and unimpressive, but we serve a great and awesome God. So the first thing that threatens to separate us from our vision and from one another is criticism. Next thing I want to talk about is misalignment. So now we're going to jump to chapter 5. Let's get some lessons out of chapter 5. Beginning of verse 1, I'm going to read the first 5 verses. It says that there was a great outcry of the people and their wives against their Jewish brethren. For there were those who said, we, our sons and our daughters are many. Therefore, let us get grain that we may eat and live. There were also some who said, we have mortgaged our lands and vineyards and houses that we might buy grain because of the famine. There were also those who said, we have borrowed money for the king's tax on our lands and vineyards. Yet now our flesh is as the flesh of our brethren, our children as their children. And indeed, we are forcing our sons and daughters to be slaves. And some of our daughters have been brought into slavery. It is not in our power to redeem them, for other men have our lands and vineyards. So not only was there trouble on the outside, but there was also trouble on the inside. There was a food shortage. They were dealing with inflation. They were dealing with overtaxation. And as a result, the people were overextended financially, and still they were hungry. So not only were they losing their casa, they were losing their kids. Like, they were so desperate that they were having to put their kids into servitude. Just a horrible, unthinkable situation. And so we're not surprised when we read in verse 6, and I became very angry when I heard their outcry and these words. Notice that word angry. In fact, the phrase very angry. Before you recommend anger management for Nehemiah, stop and think about it. Have you ever seen one of those stories in the news where, like, there's a natural disaster and, some convenience store owner is, charging, $10 for a bottle of water, kind of a thing? They've actually passed laws against that sort of thing now, but you read about that kind of exploitation and it makes you mad, right? Verse 7 tells us that the problem was with the nobles and rulers. They were exacting usury, which means that they were charging interest. There are a number of verses that address this, so I'm just going to cite one. Exodus 22 verse 25 says that Jews were not to charge interest of one another. So which part of not didn't they understand? You notice later in verse 11, there's a reference to the 100th part. So apparently they were charging 1% per month. In God's economy, they were 5th century BC loan sharks. Now, Psalm 4 verse 4, often quoted in the New Testament, says, be angry and do not sin. Paul quotes this in Ephesians 4 verse 26, for example, and the way it reads in the NIV is, in your anger, do not sin. So there's a fine line between appropriate anger and inappropriate anger. Aristotle said, but to be angry with the right person to the right degree, at the right time, for the right purpose, and in the right way, this is not easy. Nehemiah got it right, but how? Well, notice in verse 7, he says, after serious thought, I rebuked the nobles and the rulers. I love the beginning, after serious thought. So, anger in itself is not sinful. In fact, anger is a normal emotion and it's a helpful one. It lets us know when something's wrong. When we feel angry, it's because there's something wrong. There's something wrong that needs to be righted. There's something broken that needs to be fixed. There's something that needs to be addressed. The anger is not the sin. The question is what we do with the anger. We sin oftentimes in our anger. Because we're angry, we then choose to do something that's harmful and that's hurtful and that's outside of God's plan. So it's important to distinguish that. Nehemiah was understandably angry when he saw a what's in it for me mentality leading to the misalignment of his team. Still, he did not sin, as the psalmist said. Instead, he thought, it tells us, and no doubt he prayed. So we know that he did that later. It mentions it in verses 13 and 19. I'm thinking of a passage in the Proverbs. Proverbs 29 verse 11 says, a fool vents all his feelings, but a wise man holds them back. Do you know anyone who brags about always saying what's on his or her mind? You might tell them they have their own Bible verse. Yeah, a fool vents all his feelings. We want to be wise men and women. So was the solution to misalignment more misalignment? No. The answer was realignment. There was a time some years ago when I went with someone who needed tires and a front end alignment for their minivan. It was obvious that the car was out of alignment because, the tires that were on the van were so unevenly worn. And so once I got there with this person, apparently the minivan had been in this shop several times before, because after looking at the records, the salesperson pointed out that they'd been recommending a front-end alignment for this vehicle for some time. Now, no car works its way back into alignment. It doesn't matter how far you drive it or how fast you drive it. It's never just going to work its way back into alignment. And no team works its way back into alignment either. Whether you're talking about your family, your department at work, your small group at church, realignment doesn't just happen. How did team members get out of alignment in the first place? Well, sometimes it's because they never owned the vision. Maybe they went along with the crowd, but they never personally took ownership of the vision. Other times they owned it before, but not anymore. They were on the same page, but now they're off script completely. And then still other times they may have vision of their own, and for that reason, an agenda of their own. But when you had an agreed upon vision, you need the courage to confront. And in my experience, the sooner that happens, the better, because misalignment doesn't go away, it just goes underground. And it gets worse. Now, if you do have to, have a heart-to-heart with someone, could be a family member. Again, it could be a friend, but it could also be a coworker or someone at church or a member of a team in any of those places. If you do have to confront someone about misalignment when it comes to your shared vision, it's best to do it face-to-face. You can't always, but when you can, that's certainly what you want to do. On the phone, people can't see your body language. They can't look in your eyes, and that's dangerous. And email is worse because they can't even hear your tone. We always want to speak both truth and love, as Paul tells us in Ephesians 4, verse 15. You could put it this way, that you want to be truthfully loving, and you want to be lovingly truthful, and you want to be a problem solver. We see that in Nehemiah. In verses 10 and 11, Nehemiah presented specific solutions to the problem. So the truth is, if you're not prepared to present solutions, then you're just part of the problem. Your confrontation is certainly going to make things worse and not better. But in verse 12, we see that the response was overwhelmingly positive. How did Nehemiah get such a great response? Well, he had influence because he had integrity. It's important to remember that. Without integrity, you're not going to have influence. If you read the beginning of verse 14, you'll discover that Nehemiah wasn't asking them to do anything that he wasn't willing to do himself. In fact, he wasn't asking them to do anything that he wasn't already doing. It's been said that people do what people see. That's true at home. If you want your kids to be one way and we're another way, well, we're dreaming. It's true at work. If we want people who report to us to work one way and we work another way, we're dreaming. And it's even true at church. If we want people serving with us to do ministry one way and we're doing it another way, we're dreaming. Do as I say and not as I do is never found on the lips of a momentum builder, only on the lips of an inertia builder. So we're talking about those things that are threats, those things that might separate us from our vision, that might separate us from one another. We've talked about a couple of things already, but finally we want to talk about distraction. So lessons now from chapter 6. Let's read the first 3 verses. It says, "Now it happened when Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem the Arab, and the rest of our enemies heard that I had rebuilt the wall and that there were no breaks left in it, though at that time I had not hung the doors and the gates, that Sanballat and Geshem sent to me, saying, 'Come, let us meet together among the villages in the plain of Ono.' But they thought to do me harm. So I sent messengers to them, saying, 'I am doing a great work, so I cannot come down now.' I cannot come down," he says. "Why should the work cease while I leave it to go down to you?" One time I was riding in an SUV through the Arizona desert. We were on our way to Bisbee, a very cool town where we were going to grab coffee during a break at an event that I was speaking at. And so I love the desert. I've always thought the desert has a beauty of its own. And so I was looking over my right shoulder out the passenger side window at the desert. I was not looking at the road ahead when it happened. What happened, you ask? Well, suddenly I heard a long, loud series of noises from the windshield. And I turned my head just in time to see that the windshield was covered with bugs of some kind. I don't just mean a few. I mean, like, we couldn't see. We couldn't see the road in front of us. It was so bad. I mean, until obviously the driver, hit the wipers and stuff so that we could at least see where we were going. And so I asked the driver, like, what happened? And he said that he'd seen a huge cloud of what he thought were bees coming toward us. And he said that he was sure that they would avoid the collision, but instead they had flown en masse right into the windshield. When we got to Bisbee and we got out of the SUV and had a look, sure enough, there were bees' bodies everywhere, even like wedged into the grill, sticking out of the grill on the front of the vehicle. It was the craziest thing. I can't believe I missed it, that I didn't actually witness it happening. I wanted to see the whole thing in slow motion like the driver did. I mean, this was a cloud of biblical proportions, rivaling anything in the book of Exodus or the book of Revelation, but I was distracted. And so I missed this thing. Nehemiah, he had to guard against distractions. When you think about it, criticism is a distraction because the resulting hurt is a form of focus. Misalignment is a distraction too, and for the same reason, the resulting anger is a form of focus. And here we see that even good things can be a distraction. Remember my bad travel experience I shared with you guys last week? To make it up to me, the airline gave me a $25 check that could be used toward the purchase of my next ticket. Now, there were 3 ways I could redeem the check. I could take it to a national office that was 860 miles from my home at the time. I wasn't going to do that. Secondly, I could take it to the ticket counter at the nearest airport, which was a 50-mile round trip from my home. I wasn't going to do that. Or I could take it to a travel agent where I was told that they wanted $50 to process my $25 check. I wasn't going to do that. What drives me crazy about things like that is that instead of the airline actually doing something for me, they were satisfied with the appearance that they were doing something for me. So frustrating. Nehemiah, he might have been sidetracked by this distraction because it appeared to be a good thing. Most distractions do. If the things that were going to distract you and thereby separate you from your vision or from your team members, if they were bad things on the surface, who would be distracted by them? It's often good things that keep us from the best things in life. So we need to do everything we possibly can to avoid distractions. Notice in verse 4, Nehemiah adds, "But they sent me this message 4 times, and I answered them in the same manner." So the thing about distraction is that it never ends. And if we're people pleasers, we're sunk. If we feel compelled to say yes just to please people, we're sunk. We need to be God pleasers. Ultimately, momentum builders are accountable to God for the vision that He's given them. So again, we see that Nehemiah prayed. I love how, because my calendar is in the cloud, I can add a calendar item on my phone and it automatically shows up on my laptop. I can add one on my laptop, it automatically shows up on my phone. And I love that because otherwise I would end up double booking myself at some point. That actually happened to me one time where I not only had to be in 2 different places, but I had to be in 2 different states at the same time. Now, fortunately, I was able to reschedule one of my commitments. But the point is that by praying, we synchronize with God so that His agenda becomes our agenda for us. God is putting things on His agenda for us, and it's coming right up in ours. We're having the desire to do the same things, to focus on and to prioritize the same things. So listen, just kind of putting this together. What do you need to say no to this week? Who do you need to say no to this week? What or whom have you already said yes to that you should have said no to? Can you change your yes to a no? You can't always, but sometimes you can, and maybe you should. How soon can you change your yes to a no? Maybe most importantly, Have you said no to God in any area of your life? If you have, you can't change that no to a yes fast enough. So let's make sure as we pursue God-given vision in our own lives, and as we do that as a church, as we pursue God-given vision for Sola Church on the west side of Los Angeles, let's make sure that we don't ever allow criticism or misalignment or distraction to separate us from our vision or from one another. Father, thank you for these life lessons from Nehemiah. I pray, Lord, that you've spoken to each heart, that we could each have some takeaway that we could apply. Help us, Lord, to just get really good at dealing with criticism. Help us to guard against misalignment, to pursue realignment where it's needed, and also, Lord, to just learn how to avoid distraction, to say no to good things so that we can pursue great things, so that we can pursue the best things. Lord, I'm so grateful for the work that you're doing in us and through us collectively, and so excited about what the future holds for us together. In Jesus' name, amen.
And now it's time to fill out a connection card.
Yeah, the link is right there in the chat feed. This is your way of letting us know that you attended online today. It's also your way of letting us know if you'd like to participate in one of our virtual small groups. We've got start times for people in different time zones. We'd love to have you be a part of that. And also you can request more information about joining the launch team there. So if you're ready to take that step, make that commitment to be part of the team, and you haven't done that yet, you can fill out that connection card, check that box, and we'll follow up with you right away.
And don't forget to RSVP for the next startup party, which is Monday, November 15th at 7 p.m. at the Alt Studio in Santa Monica. To RSVP, you go to solachurch.life and click that yellow button that says RSVP now. And we hope you have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, everybody. Are you looking for a church on the west side? A place where anyone can believe and everyone belongs? Safe space, inclusive space, life-giving space? I'm Alan, this is my wife Miranda, and we're starting a brand new church in Santa Monica, California on January 23rd, 2022. We're kicking it all off with what we call startup parties.
At these 60-minute events, you'll have refreshments, meet our launch team members, and learn the heart and vision of what Sola Church is all about. We have giveaways and lots of fun. It's super chill, and yes, children are always welcome.
For information or to RSVP, go to solachurch.life. There are lots of dates to choose from between now and mid-November. You also have the option to schedule a coffee meetup or Zoom call with us if you have questions. We can't wait to meet you and hope to see you soon.